You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. As the United States careens into a constitutional crisis, nature's imperatives are quite indifferent because it's spring in our hemisphere. So the lilac bush is lavishing itself on the garden, drooping its branches heavy with flowers, its perfume riding every breeze, in a joyful competition with shy lily of the valley nestling underneath. They insist you have to bend and kneel to breathe in their scent. And the red azalea has burst its exuberant brazenness right beside its sedate sister, who's all dressed in pearly white. I walk out there and I remember what it feels like to be glad. And other news does happen in the world. On Wednesday, the Republic of South Africa went to the polls to vote for a new government and to celebrate its 25th anniversary of liberation from apartheid. In observance of that, my guest today for the conversation is a seasoned journalist and South African who can offer us real insight into what's actually happening and what will happen in the country with the best constitution in the world. And of course there's Surrealism Corner and Fighting Words, where we will examine the standoff in our own nation's capital from a new angle. But before we go there, we have to go inside the headlines. There is just no way I'm not going to lead this segment with the new global report from the United Nations. It shows that up to 1 million plant and animal species, more than at any other time in history, are on the verge of extinction, with deadly implications for human survival. The Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, that's IPBES, their findings link the loss of species directly to human behavior and analyze the grave impact on food and water security, farming, and world economies. For example, ocean ecosystems are degrading as temperatures rise toward 2 degrees Celsius, which is 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. That's above pre-industrial levels. Once you get to that level, models show that only 1% of coral reefs and the sea life that dwell there can survive. Nearly 150 researchers in 50 nations worked for 3 years on the report, noting that humans extract 60 billion tons from nature each year to satisfy demand worldwide for crops, fish, minerals, and other goods, which is an unsustainable harvest. None of the major networks covered the report's findings. Some print media did. Most of the cable news networks did not. But you can get a summary of the report itself at ipbes.net. Be brave. Get it. Read it. Tell people. One side effect of climate change is viral increase and displacement. A new assessment by the International Rescue Committee shows, not surprisingly, how women and girls in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, face an increased risk of violence and higher exposure to Ebola since the start of the outbreak. This is due to sexual violence and domestic violence having increased, and also because women are primary caregivers for the sick and at increased exposure consequently, accounting for 57 to 62% of confirmed and probable cases. Furthermore, women manage household prevention, which means that adolescent girls have to increase the number of trips by foot each day to fetch water, which itself increases the risks of sexual violence. And last, commercial sexual exploitation of women and girls to meet basic personal and household needs is now on the rise. Sexual assault in the American military has surged under Trump in the last 2 years. It's been driven almost entirely by a 50% increase in assaults on women in uniform. That's according to a survey released May 3rd by the Defense Department itself, which gave ammunition to people in Congress on both sides of the aisle. The conservatives were resurrecting their opposition to women serving in the military at all, and the progressives are intensifying their campaign to shift authority over sexual assault cases away from commanders who are partial and into the hands of external independent prosecutors instead. Women now make up only 20% of the military, but we are targets of 63% of assaults, with the youngest and lowest-ranking women most at risk. The study found that troops are also less likely to report such attacks than previously. The reporting rate, which is a barometer for confidence that the military will punish offenders and will protect victims, it fell to 30% in 2018 from 32% in 2016, although it's still far better than the 7% rate back in 2006. Another set of crimes that needs external, independent investigation and prosecution is set on college campuses. More than a year has passed since the resignation of Jorge Dominguez, a Harvard government professor accused of sexually harassing at least 18 female students and junior faculty members over a 20-year period. But students are still angry about a university culture that allowed him to stay and get promoted despite repeated complaints over the decades. Now, a committee formed by the government department has joined a growing number of students and faculty calling for an external review of Harvard's response. It has issued a report detailing recommended changes, including hiring more female professors and creating an anonymous reporting system for harassment. Dominguez served in leadership positions and was regarded as one of the university's premier authorities on Latin American politics. Speaking of which, a majority of the world's most dangerous cities are in Latin America, where, since the turn of the century, more than 2.5 million people have been killed. This is as a consequence of state-sanctioned deaths by armed forces, the murder of women in domestic disputes, general pervasive gender inequality and violence, the ceaseless exchange of drugs and guns with the U.S., and a climate of impunity that leaves more than 95% of homicides unsolved. The region accounts for just 8% of the global population, but 38% of the world's murders, and it has 17 of the 20 deadliest nations on Earth. In just 7 countries, Brazil, Colombia, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico, and Venezuela, violence has killed more people than the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen combined. I have to end with some good news or go running into the streets, tearing my hair and screaming. A new group is formed, calling itself Galvanize USA, with an emphasis on the gal part. They're addressing a problem that does cry out for help. White women are the single largest voting bloc. 42% of all voters nationwide. That's twice as many as all voters of color combined. In 20 years, 70% of the U.S. population will live in 16 states, but the other 30%, largely white and rural, will control 68 Senate seats, more than half. In 40 years, white folks will be a minority of the population, but the majority of the electorate in 28 states, and, as a result, white voters will maintain a dominating influence over the Senate, the Electoral College, and the Supreme Court for generations. So persuading just a small percentage of white women to act on progressive values, and research shows that they do quietly hold these values, that would shift key battleground states. In 2016, 52% of white women voters opted for Trump. It's historically consistent, to my grief, since the majority of white women voters have opted for the more regressive choice in all but 2 presidential elections since 1952. Many such women do align with progressives on key issues, but surrounded by their more conservative husbands, families, and communities, they face feelings of isolation, lack of confidence, fear of conflict, and genuine social and economic penalties for diverging from the surrounding views. This is particularly true of married or partnered women and of non-college educated voters. Think Edith Bunker in All in the Family. They need and deserve every kind of support. There are, and should be, numerous groups already working to combat voter suppression and to increase turnout among voters of color. But Galvanize appears to be the very first such organization to focus on white women voters. White women voters are experiencing a political awakening, demonstrated by the 2018 midterm elections. They swung left by 6 points nationwide, but expanding, supporting, and solidifying this trend is a necessity. You can check out galvanizeusa.org for more in-depth on the group. Remember that phrase used to be a typing exercise. We could change it slightly and say, now is the time for all good women to come to the aid of their country. We've got to take a short break here, but still to get to is Fighting Words, and in the discussion about South Africa, lessons about fighting governments saturated with corruption that I think we could learn from and profit from learning here in the United States. But coming right up is the Surrealism Corner. Don't go away. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we are back again, and in the Surrealism Corner. In the category of pure entertainment, I've rather enjoyed these past weeks of the National Rifle Association leadership arranging themselves in a circular firing squad. You must have heard that Oliver North, yes, that Oliver North, who until recently was president of the NRA, he and his team accused Wayne LaPierre, the uber honcho of the NRA, of corruption, of stealing membership fees paid by ordinary, lovable, average gun owners, $200,000 annually, in fact, for Wayne's designer suits, which he claimed he needed for appearances yearly. Parenthetically, I do not know how these guys, Trump, Paul Manafort, LaPierre, managed to look so memorably gangster-like and tacky in these expensive suits. It must be their lumpy bodies and their bad taste. Anyway, now Oliver North is defrocked as high priest and president, and LaPierre is back in, with all of his fancy suits in tow. But North has vowed revenge. I think we should find some vacant OK Corral and let them shoot it out, preferably at each other. Woody Allen is de facto unpublishable. I took a perverse delight in this item, too. Allen's been shunned by Hollywood now for some time over resurfaced allegations post-Me Too. that he sexually abused his daughter, Dylan Farrow, 30 years ago. So he decided to write a memoir telling his side of the story. And on the strength of his name, he assumed it would be a bestseller. What he had not counted on was that no major publishing house will take it. Once they would have been in a bidding war with 6 or 7-figure offers, but 4 major publishing executives passed, and others didn't even want to read the material. He could have sold his memoir to Penguin for about $3 million back in 2003, but he said he wanted a lot more. Oh, greed. Now, as they say, you could use the manuscript pages to wrap yesterday's fish. Archaeologists digging in Bolivia have discovered a 1,000-year-old collection of drug paraphernalia. Honest. According to the New Scientist journal, the find included snuffing tablets, a snuffing tube, and a pair of llama bone spatulas. Well, you say, snuffing. That could have been a pipe and some cooking utensils. What makes it drug stuff? The archaeologists will tell us what. The tablets, tube, and spatulas all held traces of 5 psychoactive chemicals, which included cocaine and the active ingredients in ayahuasca. They think the dig site may have been a funeral enclosure where, I don't know what they think, maybe everybody got stoned to send the deceased on her or his merry journey. In a somewhat related story, not quite as loopy but still surreal, 2 amateur archaeologists have uncovered a collection of 100 or more rock carvings on the coastal plain south of Mumbai, India. The hull of a boat, birds, a shark, 2 life-size tigers, 2 male human figures, more human figures. Dr. Teja Garga, head of the Directorate of Archaeology and Museums for the state of Maharashtra, estimates the oldest of the ground carvings at 40,000 years old. There are images of hunting and gathering, deer, fish, turtles. There are animals of power like the life-size tigers and elephants, a shark, and lots of fertility images of a mother goddess like those found all over the world. These now join other images left by Stone Age peoples around the planet in Australia, the American Southwest, Africa, Europe, and everywhere. Dating rock carvings is not easy, but there are clues. One is that once agriculture appears, people carve images of bulls. There are no such images in these carvings, but fossil evidence does indicate that rhinoceroses and hippopotami, who are depicted, did live in this region dating back 30,000 years. Researchers are now hoping to find shelter sites and human remains in closer proximity to the petroglyphs. But Dr. Garga said something while being interviewed that caught my attention. He noted that rock carvings come from a time when humans began to grapple with the meaning of forces affecting their lives, perhaps when the first religious ideas were forming. Many of the animals featured in the drawings, elephants, rhinos, sharks, could have been objects of fear, he said. It would make sense if these potentially dangerous creatures had been invested with spiritual power by their carvers, who were trying to pacify such power by recreating the images. Then, the sentence that got my attention was when he added, "You always worship malevolent gods first." Here's a fun, surreal fact. In forests across eastern North America, wood-eating beetles chew through falling logs. They break down the wood and return the nutrients to the soil. Many beetles become infected by a parasitic worm that turns their insides sort of into spaghetti. Still, let's not dwell on that. The infected beetles, nevertheless, eat more than uninfected ones, and the increased consumption helps the forest cycle nutrients faster and benefits the whole ecosystem. Andy Davis, an ecologist who led the research into this, said that there's a case here where, quote, There's a tiny little bug in the forest, and it's actually doing a service in the forest, something important. But then there's another tiny little bug actually doing a service in the forest that lives inside the bug that's doing something important. Close quote. Infinite regress, cycle of life, both normal and surreal. And in closing, our word of the week from another language, which it takes an entire sentence in English to approximate. The one I picked this week is good at describing the nasty glee with which I opened this segment, stories celebrating the downfalls of Woody Allen and the war between Oliver North and Wayne LaPierre. It's a German word, Schadenfreude. This is the satisfaction we find in another person's failure or suffering. Now, some would say it's a sadistic impulse. Others think the source of the pleasure, which in polite circles we're supposed to find shameful, is really just relief that another person has been shown to be, like oneself, inadequate. I'd add a third possibility, that when someone has done real damage to others, seeing them get their comeuppance is a nice moment to savor. But it should be brief, just a touch of vengeance, but only a touch, because to linger is to risk contagion, and that would be surreal. Time for another quick break before we return with the conversation. By the time you hear this, the results from the South African vote probably will be in. But although no one doubts that Ramphele will win, it's still dicey as to whether the African National Congress will win enough votes with him to make a real difference. We'll find out what the fallout from all that will be in just a moment. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back. Few journalists have written so probingly and exhaustively on women in various countries in Africa, and particularly South Africa, than Stephanie Urdang. She was born there, and she emigrated to the United States at the end of the 1960s. She became active in the anti-apartheid and solidarity movements in the late 1960s onwards. Her journalism career began with the editing of Southern Africa magazine, a publication of the Southern African Committee based in New York, and this led to an invitation to visit the liberated zones of Guinea-Bissau in 1974. Her book, Fighting Two Colonialisms, Women in Guinea-Bissau, was based on this, and on subsequent visits to independent Guinea-Bissau. In 1980, she was awarded a grant from the Ford Foundation to undertake research on women in post-independent Mozambique, and this led to her second book, And Still They Dance, Women, War, and the Struggle for Change in Mozambique. She was the research director for the American Committee on Africa, an NGO and activist organization, the one that spearheaded the successful divestment campaign in the United States. She began her work as a consultant for the UN in 1979, when she joined the staff of the mid-decade UN World Conference on Women, and she wrote widely on the effects of apartheid on women in Southern Africa. She produced and ran training workshops on gender and development for the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, and other UN agencies, and she was senior advisor on gender and HIV/AIDS for UNIFEM. In 2005, she co-founded with human rights lawyer Rakia Omar the NGO Rwanda Gift for Life, which supported women who had been raped during the 1994 genocide and were, as a consequence, living with AIDS. She's both an activist and an observer and a reporter, and her memoir, Mapping My Way Home, Activism, Nostalgia, and the Downfall of Apartheid South Africa, was published late last year, and this spring she is currently completing a young adult book in collaboration with a survivor of the Rwandan genocide, which relates the story of his survival when he was only 11, and it'll be published shortly. She lives in the United States, but she returns regularly to South Africa, and it's very good indeed to welcome Stephanie Urdang. Stephanie, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much, Robin. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, I wanted to get you on for some time because South Africa, unless something dreadful is happening there, drops off the world's consciousness when that's rather foolish for so many reasons. I've been there. I loved it there. I also hated things about it, and I am so eager to hear from you, who were born in South Africa and are a crack journalist, and who has written many books about it. Tell us what is going on now and what's been happening in a few minutes. Tell us what's been happening since liberation from apartheid.
Right.
Basically, it's been 25 years now, hasn't it?
It is 25 years since 1994, when the first democratic election took place.
Yes.
And as we know, Nelson Mandela became the first African president.
Yes.
So that was a very, very critical part of South Africa's history. And there was enormous hope at that time.
Yeah.
People really felt that South Africa was going to be a model, a beacon of hope for the whole of the continent.
The Constitution was so beautiful. It still is the best.
And it is.
Best
It
constitution in the world, yeah.
Absolutely, and the way that it deals with gender and same-sex people, it's been really, remarkable. It's ground-setting. So that's a very, very strong part of South Africa's recent history, is that strong constitution. And there's a lot that's happened that has been very, very positive. The press is free. The Constitutional Court is very, very important. And more recently, there's been a number of commissions, particularly the Zondo Commission into corruption in South Africa.
Yes.
I think probably what people have heard of most in recent years has been the corruption.
Yes.
Ramaphosa, the current president, has replaced leaders of the government, of government departments, such as the prosecuting agency. And another very strong issue in South Africa, which people don't know about that much, are the social grants. Mm-hmm. Given the level of poverty in South Africa, these are really, really important. So there's not only the so-called old age pensions, but their grants for children up to the age of 18, their disability grants, their caregiver grants, their war veterans grants, their foster child grants, and all of these together actually make it possible for people who are otherwise in dire poverty to survive. And those are very important aspects of South Africa, and something we can really applaud.
Yes.
The problems are big, and poverty is rife. Yeah. There's low status of women. There's tremendous gender-based violence. There's a very high rate of HIV, which, in this country we sort of think of as more as a chronic disease at this point.
Right.
In South Africa, it's very, very prevalent. Over 5 million people are infected. That's about 1 in 5. Gender-based violence accounts for probably about 20% of new infections.
Yes.
Women are simply unable to negotiate safe sex. They have low status, lack of empowerment. And the whole aspect of poverty has led to what has been called sugar daddies or blessers, where older men prey on young women. There's the whole question of caregiving when people are sick, because that's the role of women, to provide the care in the families.
Naturally.
So this is a tremendous draw on women's lives. Women tend to get tested more frequently than men. Men sort of think they may be weak if they go and get tested, and they're terrified of the results. But, so how I see it is that HIV and gender-based violence are very much interrelated. There's estimated that 1 in 3 women have been assaulted in South Africa, and that's amongst the highest in the world. So it's not a pretty picture when it comes to that. However, the Constitution really tries to protect that. The question is the implementation.
And which means political will.
Right. And it's really been left up to some people organizing in NGOs and a very, very vibrant resistance to what's going on. And that's where I find the hope in South Africa, is the people.
It's interesting because when I was there in 98, of course, the period you speak of, when hopes were so high and celebratory, and if we did this, and we did this in a fairly bloodless way, the world expected a bloodbath, but in fact it was a fair, relatively speaking, it was a nonviolent revolution with a great constitution. If we did this, we can do anything, and it was so heady. I mean, you were happily, cheerfully drunk with hope and joy.
Right.
And the two things that set me back a bit, because I was there in Joburg, in Cape Town, in Stellenbosch, in a number of places, to talk with women and learn the status of women primarily. So the first thing that really, gobsmacked me was the status of women, although I was also blown away by the activism. Every group was cloning itself into 5 other groups. Wherever you turned, oh no, we're a new group and we're focusing on, and the energy was very high, and they were taking advantage of technology in a way that some northern global north countries' women's movements were not, because the distances were so. That was very terrifying, but also encouraging. The other thing, and I'm curious as to whether this has changed, was that, for example, in Stellenbosch, the power hadn't changed, the money hadn't changed. The great vineyards were still all owned by white folks and all worked by black folks. And the power imbalance in terms of sheer who owns what was pretty much the same. Has that altered at all?
It's altered in the sense that there are now more blacks as part of the middle class and upper middle class. So that, we can't say that only the whites are controlling the economy. It's a mixed, more complex situation now. But I think that kind of power relationship is still very, very obvious. And I think that, one of the questions at the bottom of this is the land question.
Yes.
And I think it's very hard to understand South Africa unless one understands that historically, in terms of apartheid, Africans were relegated to about 10 or 11% of the land. That was the land they were entitled to live in and be citizens of. They lost their citizenship rights in the country of their birth. And those were the so-called Bantustans that were set aside as quote-unquote independent countries, which of course nobody recognized.
Yes.
The rest of the country was allocated to whites, but the good rural areas, the urban areas, and Africans only had rights to come into the so-called white areas
to labor.
Exactly, and their passbooks had to show that they were there legally. Otherwise, they were arrested, and there were just thousands and thousands of arrests as a result of that. The land was taken away from even people that had land rights. Because before 1910, Africans were able to actually own land. Otherwise, the land is owned by chiefs or, by the large ethnic communities.
Right.
So as long as you had a contract that showed that you owned the land, you were entitled to that land. Mm-hmm. But that was also removed. Mm-hmm. And so we now have a situation where people are really beginning to demand, as you can imagine, their land.
Yeah.
And it's still in terms of the rural areas, it's in the vast hands of white farmers. Yes. Some of whom have actually left the country but still own the land. And so this is one of the biggest challenges ahead for Ramaphosa, is how he's going to deal with this. Mm-hmm. And I think it's unfortunate that it wasn't dealt with right on from the beginning.
I do too.
It's now being dealt with because he's being pressured.
I see.
And then it becomes something of a pressure cooker, ready to explode. So we don't really know where that's going to go. At the moment, the policy is that land will not be grabbed in the way that it was in Zimbabwe, but that land that's unoccupied will be reallocated, and then we'll see what goes after that.
Interestingly,
but it's not really clear at this moment what the future is in this particular area.
One of the positions of Winnie Mandela, the much maligned, was land.
Exactly.
And she was ticked off at her husband, at Nelson, because he forfeited. Well, he didn't forfeit land, but I mean he forfeited the issue at the very beginning. Whereas had it been dealt with at the beginning, as you say, it would have been a very different South Africa today.
Yeah. And there's a lot of obviously hurt and anger over that.
Oh, of course.
So. But it's interesting because I've visited South Africa pretty frequently. And I was there in June last year, which was about 6 months after Ramaphosa took over from President Zuma. Yeah. And at that point, whenever I asked anybody, so what are you thinking? What do you feel about the new president? Was, we're so hopeful. I think things are going to change. We really can see the light. This is excellent. Yeah. Going back now, I've just come back. I asked some of the same people, and they said they have no hope. They just feel that South Africa is on such a downward spiral. Now, that's not everybody. But I did get a sense of that hope that we were breaking out of the hold of Zuma and the corruption that went with it. And
he was a
what
disaster.
Has been called state. Yeah, total disaster. Yeah. And as we like to say, at least we got rid of the president.
That's right.
It's been a little harder in this country.
Yes.
But it's at a real crux now in terms of what can happen and what kind of power Ramaphosa can master. There's still many of the old guard.
What about the leadership of women? There are so many incredible South Africa. I think of Frene. I think of Preg's governor.
Yes.
Yeah, of Navi Pillay. Of I mean, there's so in middle leadership, in pipeline, in top leadership, and in NGO on the ground. There are just these incredible women working day and night, with a real different vision and the muscle to put behind it. Is it still just so hopelessly?
That still goes on, and there's a kind of vibrancy in South Africa that I love when I go there because of the work that's being done on the ground. And it's not only the NGOs or the women, for example, that you mentioned, but in the rural areas, in the townships, protesting against bad service delivery. A constant kind of pushing back. It's almost as if the anti-apartheid movement and their struggle entered the DNA of South Africans, and they say, whatever happens, we continue to struggle. It's part of who we are.
Yes, in 1989, when I was there, 1999, there were women organizing in KwaZulu-Natal against the Zulu tradition and superstition that if a man had AIDS, if he slept with a virgin, that would cure him. And there were women organizing over this and saying, you're killing our daughters, you will not do this. And their houses were being burnt down, these women. Their goats were being slaughtered in punishment, and they were still organizing.
That's right.
All that amazing energy and dedication has to go somewhere, surely.
Yeah, and I think, and that's why I'm still an optimist. I mean, I just have not given up on South Africa, because there are the structures in place, and there are the kind of organizing that you've described, and they're just across the board. There are men and organizing against violence, and some very impressive organizations working with women, understanding that we also have to change the attitudes and behavior of men. It's not just, women fighting for their rights. So there is that, and that's a kind of leitmotif or an undercurrent that really exists in South Africa, and I think, that has not been broken. But there is more frustration, because it seems to be, getting harder. It is 25 years.
Yeah.
And people had hoped we would be in a different place.
What do you think it will take, Stephanie?
That's such a big question.
Yes, I
think
unfair.
I mean, it's a very important question, actually. Certainly the leadership has to root out corruption in every single way, because this is something that all South Africans know about. And unless there's actually implementation and indictments that result from the commissions that are now being televised daily on TV, so everybody knows what's happening.
That's good.
But I think, one of Ramaphosa's first acts would need to be rooting that out totally, and really making an effort to show that there's a new government in charge. Whether he can do that is the big question, because there's a real tension between the ANC members that really want change, the old guard who are very disappointed in what's happening now, very angry about what's happening, trying to save the ANC, and then the corruption that is very attractive to people who are corrupt.
Of course.
It's very hard for them to give that up. Yeah. So there has to be a very, very firm stand on that. And I think, and I don't have a crystal ball. I just don't know what's going to happen. I mean, it was interesting being there just a few weeks before the election, and in some ways it may not have been a good time to be there, because people were so obsessed about the sort of day-to-day announcements, the discussions, this party versus that, who people were going to vote for, that it was harder to get an overview, sort of to get a sense of the pulse of the country that I like getting when I go back. I try and go back pretty much every year or two. So I still, there was still, but the positive part about that was there was this engagement of everybody. I mean, the debates, whether it was on TV or radio or at bus stops or in supermarkets or in the townships, people were talking about it constantly and expressing their anger, expressing their hopes, wanting change. And as you say, there's this sort of groundswell of an undercurrent of resistance that continues. And, I hope that that's what will win out in the end.
That's where we place our trust, I guess.
Yeah.
Stephanie has written this wonderful memoir, Mapping My Way Home, Activism, Nostalgia, and the Downfall of Apartheid South Africa, which I highly recommend. And I thank you for your insight and the work that you've done and the work you continue to do. And I thank you, Stephanie, for being with us today. I hope you'll come back and check with us again and update us after your next trip.
Well, I'd love to do that. And thank you so much for having me on your show.
And we need to take one last break before we come back with some fighting words.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, it's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Talk radio with a brain.
Welcome back again to some fighting words. The first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers. That line, which you might recognize, is from Shakespeare's Henry VI, Part 2, and its meaning has been debated. Some scholars insist that the speaker, a murderous ne'er-do-well character named Dick the Butcher, is dead serious and hates lawyers because lawyers are the defenders of justice. But other scholars insist that because the scene is one of Shakespeare's great comic gutter-snipe street people scenes, it's meant as a laugh line to express a general loathing and a send-up of corrupt, expensive lawyers. I think Shakespeare means both and is slaying two Dick Butchers with one stone. That works today, too. On the one hand, more than 700 and still counting principled former federal prosecutors have signed an open letter stating that acts committed by Donald Trump, as outlined in the Mueller report, had they been committed by anyone else, that person would be in jail by now for obstructing justice. They also note that no one is above the law because of holding any elected office. On the other hand, there's a depressingly large number of lawyers on board the sinking Trump ship, defending to the very last gasp their boss's wannabe dictatorial powers. Only one thing is certain. Members of the bar are making a fortune in fees these days. What's happening to the concept of the law's dignity is another matter, of course. The shredding of that, plus the relentless, small and large acts defying and eroding the Constitution of the United States, is another thing altogether. In that process, words are malleable and carry meaningless meaning depending on their speaker. For example, the GOP lawyer brigade, which includes many senators, I'm afraid, strongly defends tradition, when that tradition has been established by the OIC, the Office of Internal Counsel, at the Justice Department, and when that office says that such a tradition means a sitting president cannot be indicted, and that if he can't be indicted, he cannot de facto be charged. All the Trumpians cling to that, as reverently as if it were law or constitution, which it's not. On the other hand, traditions based on precedent, for instance, that a candidate or sitting president always reveals her or his tax returns, why, that's discarded by such people. Worse, much worse, tradition as established by the Constitution itself and is formal law gets shrugged away, even though it cuts to the heart of our democratic system, such as congressional obligation to exercise oversight of the executive branch, and the congressional right and duty to subpoena necessary witnesses required to get at the truth for testimony in pursuing their duty to oversee. Tradition to the once great Republican Party these days is in the eye of the observer. But there are cracks in the Republican wall that Trump wishes he had built. Although Trump, his officials, and Mitch McConnell still say wishfully, it's all over, it's done, finished, Senator Richard Burr of North Carolina, the Republican chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, last week subpoenaed Donald Trump Jr., sending shockwaves through the GOP ranks. And meanwhile, the House Judiciary Committee, controlled by Democrats, has put in motion a process that will hold Attorney General Barr in contempt of Congress. And also, meanwhile, the press continues doing its job, the New York Times reporting, for example, that Trump lost more than $1 billion over 10 years. Look, this is a period where we may have to escalate our daily dose of Dramamine and possibly add in some anti-anxiety tablets for good measure. For those who worry that Pelosi and Nadler, Democratic chair of the House Judiciary Committee, aren't moving fast enough or are appeasing by not filing for impeachment as of yesterday or the month before or the month before that, it's important to remember who they're really aiming at. We needn't worry about Pelosi's being unconcerned, as some have said. She's already made quite clear that in the 2016 and 2018 elections both, she feared Trump would not recognize the election results themselves. That's very serious. That means she feels we are nearing a precipitous brink of civil chaos, or even, breathe it aloud, civil war. She's perfectly aware of the dangers and trying to steer us around them while still preserving democracy. The same is true for Chairman Nadler. What we forget, and would do well to remember over the next weeks, is that both Pelosi and Nadler are bent on building ironclad cases. You know how the press often refers to Trumpians as playing to an audience of one, that one being the orange guy sitting in the White House eating junk food and watching TV? Well, Pelosi and Nadler are playing to a confused and fractious American public, but they are also really playing to an audience of one. Not Trump, no. Certainly not Putin. Not Mueller, either. They are playing a long game, looking ahead. They are playing to Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John G. Roberts. Most, if not all, of these questions will be resolved at the Supreme Court level. And Trump says straight out that he relies on that because he has stacked the court. He says this, my court. It certainly isn't going to be a Kavanaugh or Gorsuch who defends the Constitution against him. He appointed them. Nor is it likely that Thomas or Alito will suddenly see the light. It's interesting to note that 6 of the 9 justices currently sitting, 2/3 of the court, all GOP-appointed justices, are Catholic, including one liberal justice, Sonia Sotomayor, who calls herself a cultural Catholic. But then there is the Chief Justice, a real serious Catholic. He also knows that courts make history and are informally always named after their chief justices, the Warren Court, the Burger Court. He knows this will be the Roberts Court. In the past, he has shown concern about preserving the reputation of the court and preserving the legal system itself untarnished. It's thought that this may well be the reason he surprised his right-wing colleagues by voting to validate the authority of the Affordable Care Act. Then he voted on Obergefell versus Hodges, which stated same-sex marriage was a constitutional right. His vote was yes. Roberts is an avid supporter of the belief that the role of the court is as an umpire, meaning that the role is to interpret the rules, not create them. He has remained steadfast in deferring to the existing power structure and precedent, and to interpreting, not creating law, even in the face of angering his political party. This does not bode well for disruptor Trump. Roberts has become, in other words, the crucial swing vote. He is the audience of one, and to that one, Pelosi, Nadler, and the other Democratic committee chairs in the House want to show an impeccable record of fairness and dotting all the I's while crossing all the T's in their investigative processes and in exercising their congressional prerogatives and obligations. That's their job. It's our job to demonstrate through public actions and pressure on Congress that letting Congress do its job is the route to saving our republic. The court listens to that. It will eventually come down, I think, to the Chief Justice's moral compass. Maybe, come to think of it, we should find out who is John G. Roberts, priest and confessor. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag #FightingWords. And that's our show for today. You can follow me on Twitter at @TheRobinMorgan and on Facebook at facebook.com/TheRobinMorgan. Check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book, Dark Matter, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for our show. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.